Well, welcome. I'm Linda Brander, and we welcome you all today to honor these wonderful ladies who talk about their stories in agriculture and conservation. And they have come many, many miles, some of them to be here today, and we appreciate that. And first off, I thought I'd give you a little heads up. First off, we talked to the museum staff, and somebody is working on the boiler, so heat may be on its way. They said that they have to get the main boiler going, and it's going to take a while to circulate back here. So I said, at least if we offer you some hope, that might help. I really want to give you a little background on this book. I work at the Department of Natural Resources and Conservation, and in 2012, I came up with an idea to come up with an oral history project. And we are in the Department of Natural Resources. I work in the Conservation Bureau, and Lori Zeller later is going to tell you a little bit more about conservation districts. But conservation districts work at the local level in 58 different areas and in 56 counties, and their role is to promote voluntary conservation through doing on-the-ground projects in education and private conservation with private landowners. And we're always in the realm of looking for educational tools to help educate folks out there, both in the ag world and the non-ag world, exactly what conservation is and what our ag industry does for it. And so we came up with the oral history idea, and that started in 2012. And there's two people in this audience that became my co-creators that helped drive this. One is Denise Thompson, if you'll raise your hand, and another is Belinda Napton. And so the three of us were passionate about this. And it started out by just a few conservation districts. Local people would go out and record histories of women in their area. And since 2012, we have built up to 51 oral histories. And they are online at our DNRC website, plus they're going to be on the collection in here at the Historical Society. And since our website's kind of hard to get to the stories, the best way to get to our stories is to go to From the Ground Up, Montana Women in Ag. And so the stories that you hear in the book, plus the stories you're going to hear today, have some from the oral history. And then we came up with the idea of the book. I wanted to do a book. And my book idea was once again well endorsed and supported by my boss, Lori Zeller, and she'll raise her hand. And so we decided to move forward. And the book idea started in, about 3 years ago. And so it's been a passion of mine, but the book came together because many talented people came together to make it happen. And our first is our writer, Chris Ellis. And Chris, you must stand and turn around. It was a labor of love. It took over a year because Chris not only went through 51 oral histories and read about them, she then conducted personal interviews with 13 or 16 ladies to get more information and more passion and ideas about who they are and their views on ag and conservation. So the book has 13 chapters and 16 ladies in it. But also our book contains the quotes of every woman we've had in our oral history project. And I want to see, we have 3 of them here today, I believe. I can see Donna Lenore, will you raise your hand? Barbara Broberg. Oh, okay. And then Diana Gravely, I saw her earlier. Yay. So they're 3, they're here too. So they're all going to be available along with these ladies for book signing. So that is how this book became where it is. And then also we had to have someone be the fiscal sponsor and develop a contract with our publisher, and that became the Glacier County Conservation District. And then Broadwater Conservation District also hopped in to become kind of the foundation to help get this book going and bring it to where it is today. So we want to thank them. And I particularly just want to thank also our photographer, Ross Campbell. Ross is an on-staff graphic person, and he volunteered to go out to all of these ladies' ranches, and 12 of them, I should say, and take photos of them. He traveled all over the state, from Cut Bank to Big Timber to Avon, and he photographed them in their natural settings, and then we collected old photos from them, and he scanned them all in. So the photos in this book are the result of Ross Campbell, and then we, as an editorial team, selected the photos that would go in if they met the approval of the publisher. So the publisher was the History Press, and they were a delight to work with. So I do want to just thank you all for coming, and it was an idea that I had, but ideas do not go anywhere with a lot of wonderful people helping make it happen, and talented people. So now I want to just thank you all for coming, and we are sponsoring this event today with the Montana Historical Society. So now I want to introduce Deb Mitchell.
Well, good morning. I'm so glad you're all here. We're so honored to be able to sponsor this with these amazing women. I want to thank you all for coming, as Linda did, and the main thing I want you to do is enjoy today. So have a good time. The exhibits are all going to be open afterwards. If you'd like to take a look around, we'd love to have you. Thank you.
Thank you. And now Lori Zeller, who is the Bureau Chief at DNRC's Conservation District Bureau, is going to tell you more about the conservation districts. I told Lori that she's the best person to talk about them because she is as passionate about the conservation districts and the people who support and run them as I have been about this book. Lori Zeller.
Good morning. Thank you for being here. Linda gives me far too much credit. I don't know if those of you who know her know that once she gets an idea in her head, you just pretty much have to get out of her way. She's just done a really fantastic job, and the support of the conservation districts have been fantastic throughout this whole project. 80 years ago, if a government scientist came up to you and said, we know you have a soil erosion problem and we're here to help, it would have gone over like a lead balloon. Not a lot different than today, but that's what happened during the Dust Bowl days. The wind was blowing and the soil was blowing and the skies were black, and there was a lot of devastation in Montana and throughout the country. And because of our independent nature and the suspicion of government, they needed a way to reach the farmers and to try to help teach agriculture how to adopt some of these newer revolutionary ways of farming. Oscar Hippie, one of the original conservation district supervisors, told us what it was like back then. The wind was blowing day after day. They had to put socks and towels and every rag that they could around the windows so they wouldn't choke to death with the dust. And after the conservation districts were formed and they formed a partnership with the government, they reached a lot of these people. They convinced people to try these revolutionary farming practices, and they would bring people from all over the state to come and look at them. And so from farmer to farmer, neighbor to neighbor, they were able to show each other the benefits, not only the economic benefits, but the benefits of being able to do these conservation practices. We're going into our 80th year of conservation districts and encouraging people and teaching people and showing people new ways of adopting the new ways of farming, the things that are coming out today that are different. Conservation districts still operate in that fashion where they demonstrate, they show people. It's all voluntary and it works. They were able to revolutionize farming in a very short order. I'm very happy today to recognize and celebrate the women's role in this. I see many of you that have been involved in conservation districts for a long time. But when you read these stories, you hear stories of endurance, you hear stories of dedication to the land, you hear stories of their dedication to their families, the women behind the scenes and keeping their families going while all of this hardship was going on. You hear stories of their dedication to their communities. And you hear stories of lives well lived, and we're very happy to be able to take part in that and share that with you. So thank you very much. Sorry, get a little passionate about it.
And before I turn it over to our moderator, Denise Thompson, we want to honor, we have 3 ladies that are in your book that passed away before the book was published. And one in particular is Pauline Webb. And Pauline Webb is, when we started the Oral History Project, Pauline was our poster child. She traveled many places with us promoting the Oral History Project at the time. She was a very dedicated woman to ranching. She worked with the ag and schools, cattle women, and she did many more. She was from Broadwater County in Townsend. And she spoke at our convention in 2016, I believe, our Montana Association of Conservation Districts, and she had the audience. They loved her. And so I really want to honor her, and her daughter and son-in-law are here today. So Susan, Mayor, and Mike back there, would you raise your hands? And we really wish Pauline could have been here to celebrate with us, because she was really gung-ho about the book. And I want to tell you one story. We took her to a class in Kalispell. They combined 2 classes of English teachers, English students and history students, and there was about 150 kids in the room when Pauline spoke, and not one was gawking anything. They were all so engaged with Pauline, it was unbelievable. And when we left the last 5 minutes for answers and questions, at any given time, there was 10 hands up. And then afterwards, many of them wanted to come down and get their picture taken with Pauline. It was just dynamite. And they asked really poignant questions. The next ladies we want to honor is Eva Amundsen and Connie Kane. Eva Amundsen was 106 years old when she died. She grew up in the Dust Bowl. They farmed over by Joplin. And so Denise Thompson and I went down to celebrate her 105th birthday. And I believe at the time we conducted an interview then. And then her daughter at that time, Connie Kane, was there. And this was a couple years ago. Connie had driven all the way from Broadus. And I said, after the event ended at the retirement home in Missoula, "Are you going to drive back to Miles City? It's going to be about 5 o'clock before you leave Missoula." She says, "Well, of course. I do it all the time." So it was last year, Chris and I got to interview both of them together. I didn't go on any of the interviews with Chris or participate in any of the face-to-face except those 2. And I just sat in the background and listened to Chris interview them, and it was so endearing and inspiring, because Connie was also a very key person who developed Opportunity Inc. over in Missoula, which is for disabled people. And so her granddaughter is here today, Diana Carlstead, and must be great-grandchildren. Thank you. So now I'm going to turn it over to my very dear friend and your moderator. She also is a ranch woman over in Townsend, and she said this morning, "I might be a little late because I'll be out irrigating," but she made it. Denise.
Hello. Yeah, I just live down the road in Townsend, and I was born and raised there. And my husband and I have 4 children and 5 grandchildren, and our grandchildren are the 7th generation on my mother-in-law's family's ranch. And so we're pretty deep-rooted in Broadwater County. At one time, my children had 5 sets of grandparents alive at one time in Townsend. And so history and family and the older generation have just always been extremely important to me. And then when Lori cries, that just makes me really want to cry. Anyway, I guess I'm supposed to moderate. I don't know what that means, because I tend to chatter a lot. But we're going to let these women talk. But before I get there, I really want to stress something. You know, Lori talked about Linda. And we all have machinery, we all have lawnmowers, we all have trucks and cars and tractors, and it seems like a couple important elements for those units to run is they need to have fuel, they need to have a really good spark plug that's firing, and they need to have a driver that's responsible and reliable and passionate about what they're doing. And that describes Linda Brander to a T. It has been the most enjoyable experience working with her these past 6 or 7 years. And she's done a great job, and she's kept this going. And it's so important to remember our history. And so we need to give Linda a big hand. And I didn't realize that she had her aunt, Violet Brander, and her sister were trick riders and bronc riders. And if any of you know Montana history, Fanny Sperry Steele was a lady that I just thought a lot of. She was a trick rider from the Avon country. And she learned from Linda's aunt. And I didn't know that. The other way around. Oh, okay. Anyway, it's pretty cool stuff. There's a quote that says, "A people without the knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots." And so I think it's extra important that we have these women's history recorded. I know a lot of them thought, what, I'm just a normal lady. I don't have anything important to say. I just work, it's not really an extravagant life, but it is so very important. I mean, our roots are embedded in what these women have lived. And I love the title of the book, Montana Women from the Ground Up, Passionate Voices. And if there's one thing that these women bring to the table is their passion, their labor of love. And don't get me wrong, I like men. And there's a few in this room today. And we need those men, and they are important. But the labor of love that women can bring to the agricultural world, to the conservation world, through their simple hard work of canning and irrigating and cooking and providing for the branding crew and helping out in the field and running errands and keeping the books and just giving a smile and a hug to their husband and their children when they come home at the end of the day. That's pretty remarkable. So thank you. I think we're going to start with Janet. Since she tends to talk a lot, we thought we'd get her out of the way first. And if you've looked at the book at all, her quote is, "Don't tell them you're good, show them." And I tell you what, this lady can do that. And I believe her daughter's here today, Rachel. And would you agree? Yeah. But I have had the honor of actually knowing Janet for quite a long time, and her family, there's some connections with Broadwater County, and one of her stories in her book is, she didn't tell the location, but she had come to Townsend to brand, and I can't say it as well as her, and she's probably going to share that story. But she came to brand, and everybody kind of looked at this girl, this girl didn't know what she's doing, and boy, she showed them. And so I'm sure she'll elaborate on that. And she has just been a great supervisor for the conservation world. We've enjoyed our get-togethers at convention and running into each other here and there. She's from the Madison Conservation District. She has a beautiful ranch down at McAllister. And so we're going to allow her to share her story with you.
I think it works. Okay. I am Janet Endicott. I'm from McAllister. And for those of you who don't know where McAllister is, which I don't know why you wouldn't, we have a post office and a bar. It's in southwest Montana, about 7 miles north of Ennis. Most people know where Ennis is. So it's in the Madison Valley, along the Madison River. It's a beautiful valley, but we do have a lot of wind. When Linda first approached me about this project, I told her I really wasn't old enough to be in this history thing. And she assured me I was plenty old enough, so here I am. So, yeah. I work with my family, the Goggins Ranch, based out of Ennis. I live on another ranch out of McAllister. My parents, Bob and Cora Goggins, bought their first registered Hereford cattle in 1955, and then bought the place that they are on still north of Ennis in 1959. And they're 89 and Dad's almost 94 and still living in their house and just doing their thing. In the ranch now, my brother Pat and I are partners, and my daughter Rachel is working her way into it too. So just keeping the family going, and it's just the best way to do things. I've been involved in the ranch since I was born. I don't know anything else. So it's, to me, just the best way to live. You've got, you learn early in life about life and death. You learn about responsibility, how to be there for someone. You have really good roots to the land. And I really don't know how to explain that. I'm sure everybody, you have the feel because the land is just part of you. Everything you do comes from the land and goes back to it. So growing up, watching my dad do things, the word conservation really never came up. It's just, this is the right thing to do. And sometimes you would do things and you'd say, man, that really didn't work as well as I thought. And so with trial and error, you find what works. And what works for one place in the state obviously will not work for another. So you have to be very cognizant of what works for you. And try new things, and some will work, some won't. And so it's always something new. And of course, Mother Nature puts her foot in now and then, and so what works one year might not work the next year. When I got, I guess like 16, 17 years ago, I was asked to be on the Board of Supervisors of the Madison Conservation District. I was the first woman on that board. I'm not sure what they were expecting, but they may have gotten more than they expected. Right, Lori? Yeah. And then I also served on the board of directors for the Montana Association of Conservation Districts. And that was really a good experience, getting to know people from all over the state who do the same things that I do. And you just learn so much of the different practices that they go through, because like in Jordan, Montana, it's a lot different than Ennis, Montana, I can guarantee that. So that was always fun, just a good way to do things. And going through that, we've done quite a few different projects on my brother's ranch and on mine, going through the process of, we both have live water going through our property, and the cows like the streams a lot. And sometimes they like it a little too much at certain times of the year. And so when you have a problem spot, it's like, you kind of know you have to do something, but finding out exactly what to do can be a little more difficult. And working with our conservation district and NRCS and all sorts of people, we came up, and what we did was we made riparian pastures. We didn't fence the creek off. Because because that's not a good thing to say, is fence the creek off. So we made pastures, and we still do graze it, but it's very targeted and very controlled, and it has worked amazingly for us on both places. And we also we're going to start another new project. Fish, Wildlife, and Parks comes in, and they shock the creek for fish, and there's the lower part of it is great, and it's doing really well, and then get into this upper part that at some time someone had straightened in the past, and they go, it's like a whole nother world. There's like no fish there. So we're going to try to do some plantings and some just do a few little things trying to improve the stream and see if we can get the fish count up there too. All these tributaries to the Madison are very important for the tourist industry and the fishermen, and it all works together. If we can keep our whole valley successful, that helps with the agriculture too. So some of the really good things with living on the ranch, every season brings something new, and after a long winter, like this winter that never wanted to end, when spring comes, it's so good. You know, I get to be out there every day. I see the new calves getting up, sucking mama, the rebirth, and now the green grass is coming. And it's just something that it gives me a thrill every single year. It just keeps coming. What a joy it is to be able to see that and work out there. And we still flood irrigate. And so a lot of times that first time when you turn the water on in the spring and you're out there and the water's running and you can just hear the ground bubbling and soaking it up, and you know, I just stand there and I listen to it and it's like, this is the coolest thing. How lucky am I? How lucky am I? So one thing about living with that agriculture, you really learn to set priorities, because you find out very young in life you can't do everything. You find out what's the most important things, and then you work towards doing those. Just like this morning, we're still feeding cows. The grass is hard to come, so we had to feed cows, get cleaned up, and leave by 7:30 this morning. So, but it works. It works. So, some of my fond memories, like Denise was saying, when my brother lived in Townsend, we came over to a branding, and well, he knew, and I just get in there and do stuff. And afterwards, when I was putting my horse up, these two old guys came over and they said, we've been watching you today. And I said, oh. I said, and you're just a real hand. And I think it may have been one of the best compliments in my entire life. When an older rancher said that I was a hand, that was pretty good. So, and I've always loved the cows. They're number one to me. I remember one good story that we had a bull that Dad bought up at Calgary, and he was a show bull. And he'd just never seen a horse. He didn't know what horses were. And anytime you'd come out on a horse, he'd take you. He didn't care. He'd hit you. He'd knock you down. You get off the horse, you're fine. Well, he got into the neighbors. And the neighbor called Dad, and he was really, really mad. He says, your bull is in here, and I tried to get him out, and he knocked my horse down, and he did this, and just really going. So Dad and I went down in the pickup, and I took a halter, got down there, and Dad kicks me out, and that guy's going, what are you doing? She's going to get killed. Get her out of there. I walked up to Britt, put the halter on, and let him out of the field. So the neighbor wasn't impressed. But it made me feel good. And I don't know, one of the best things, work hard in life. Do what you have to do. It's not always going to be easy. It's not always going to be fun. But by and large, the good will take over. And I just think I'm the luckiest person in the world to live the life I have. It's been a good one, and just keep carrying on. So, thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to move on to Betty Hedstrom. She's from Rainsford Country, and in her story, something that really stuck out with me was when she says, we've always done it as a partnership. It doesn't matter whether we're fencing or feeding cows or whatever. I do most of the riding in the summer, and he does the mechanic work. It's a good trade-off. And if I'm down suckling a calf, which he hates to do, he has no problem putting supper on the table. And, many of you know Steve and Betty, and they are a tremendous partnership. And what a joy to observe and watch them carry themselves both in their work and in their conservation efforts around the state and the nation. For Steve, he travels all over the nation doing things for the conservation districts. And so, and Betty's extremely humble, hardworking woman, and she definitely loves Montana. And she shared a story yesterday about that with the supermoon, so hopefully she'll share that today.
Okay. I'm Betty Hedstrom, and I grew up in a big town, kind of like Janet did. I'm in the town of Rainsford, which some of you might not know where that is. But it is 30 miles southeast of Great Falls, and we live right on the highway between Belt and Geyser. And I went to school in Rainsford. It was a 2-room school, and there were 30 kids when I went to school there. And I was in one of the biggest classes. There were 5 of us in my class. I did go to school in Belt and graduated from there, and then went on to go to college in Bozeman at MSU, and that's where I met my husband. He was in ag business, and so was I. And I always wanted to go back to the ranch. I grew up, I was the 6th kid out of 8 from Antone and Mary Ann Johnson. And my grandpa homesteaded in the Rainsford area, not right where we live. It was 6 miles back up in the foothills. And he homesteaded in 1889. And that was before Montana became a state. They did become a state that year, but he'd homesteaded before then. And so the place has passed down through my dad. My grandpa was 52 years old, though, when he got married, so we skipped a generation. We don't have near as many generations as Janet does, even if we've been around for a long time. So we came back to the place, and I have 3 children and 8 grandkids. And Linda said she would like us to tell us how old we are. I'm 63 years old. And I still live in the same house that I was brought up in. And it was the house that my grandpa had built in 1906. We actually moved it from the home place down to where we live. And the place we're on right now, we bought in 1950, and it was so us kids could get to school, because where he homesteaded was really hard to get out in the wintertime. And if anybody's from Montana, they know that winters can be brutal. My mother was actually from North Texas, and I give her a lot of credit, because North Texas, 100 miles north of Amarillo, is very flat country. And we live in the foothills between the high woods and the little belts. We're not right in the mountains, but we're not in flat country. Because when I first met Steve, he was from Kalispell, and he always felt that the western side had all the mountains. And he says, "Oh, so you're from the east side, and you're a flatlander." I says, "We don't have an inch of flat land on our place." We have a cow-calf operation. We raise Angus cattle, not Herefords. But when we first got started back in 1986, when my mom and dad were splitting up the ranch, we also ran sheep for a while. We had 200 head of sheep until about 2000, when we went into a drought, and we had to sell we either had to sell cows or we had to sell sheep, and my preference was cows, so we sold the sheep at that time. And we always thought we'd get back into them, but we haven't. So, but it's been a good life. I'm not on the conservation district, but like Denise said, my husband is. He's on the He's been on the board for several years, on the local level, the state level, and now he's on the national level. So we do get to travel a lot. I don't always go with him. A lot of times I stay home and take care of things on the ranch while he travels. But like Janet says, you do get to see a lot of different operations and go on tours. And I think that's very important. If somebody is having a seminar or like a range school, don't be afraid to go to it.
Betty, they can't hear you out front. Can you hold?
Oh, okay. Education is important, and we're always learning. And any of these conferences you go to, you can pick up some idea and try it at home. It's very important. We don't do much farming. We're all dry land. The other thing that's unique about our place is we do have some private leases, but we do not have any BLM, state, or Forest Service. We're strictly deeded ground. We've got a lot of rocky soil, and so instead of growing alfalfa, we grow sandfoin, which if you've ever driven past and you see a field of pretty pink flowers, that's sandfoin. It's a legume like alfalfa, but it likes to grow in shallow, rocky soil, and we do much better with that. We do put some alfalfa down on the creek bottom, but up on top where a lot of our hay ground is, we raise the sandfoin. And the other plus about sandfoin is it does not cause bloat in cattle like alfalfa does. If you read my story, you'll know that when I was growing up, I used to train horses. We would get green colts in, and we would ride them for 6 weeks. And when you're doing this, at that period of time, we rode all the time. We didn't stick them in a trailer. We just took off in the morning, and we went and did what we did and came home. And you could get a horse broke pretty good. But there are 3 ingredients to a good horse wreck. One is a dog, one is a cow, and one is a green colt. And how it works is the cow chases the dog runs under the horse, and the horse blows up. So I agree with Janet that we are very lucky. Right now you can go riding out in the pasture and all the fresh wildflowers are coming up, and the green grass has finally started growing, which we quit putting out hay the day before yesterday because it's been a very long, cold spring. I do work outside with Steve all the time, but when we're doing like brandings or working cattle or something, I always have to plan the meals ahead of time so I can put them on right when I get in the house, because I'm not going to be in the house that morning to fix them. So it always takes a little extra planning. And a lot of times I'm the last one to get to the house because I'm putting up my horse and doing things. But it is a great way of life. And you do have to have a passion for it, because if it was an easy way of life, a lot of other people would be in it. And we're high-stake gamblers. We gamble the weather. We gamble the prices. It's our way of life. And we seem to just go on. You have to have an optimistic point of view, and there's always next year. What Denise was referring to is some of the fun things we do is, this was when I've got 2 girls and 1 boy, but my boy never enjoyed riding like the girls did. And it was on the supermoon. And the girls were home right then. And I says, so how would you like to go take a ride? And it was 10:30 at night, but we had the supermoon. So we went and saddled up our horses, and we went for a moonlight ride, and it was a lot of fun. But we're able to do things like that because we have the animals there, and we can go do it and enjoy it. It's been a great way of life. My husband does spoil me very much. He likes to weld and do things, so he has built gates, and we actually have metal gates going all the way across the place on the main road. I still have to open wire gates part of the time, but on the main road you can go across, and there's a metal gate there. And they swing, which is also a big point. We have enjoyed doing this interview. I didn't know if the book would ever come to fruition or not, but it has, and it looks like it's going to be a good deal. So.
Thank you, Betty. Betty's little story about the gates kind of reminds me of anniversary gift I got for my husband. You know, I am assuming probably most of you receive simple things, but they mean a lot. And my husband had to go to the dump the day of our anniversary, and so he showed up with a hoodie that he got out of the dump for me. But the zipper didn't work. But I wore it for a long time for work, and so we kind of laugh about that. But our next lady is Colleen Gustafson from Glacier, and she is actually on the cover as well. She's up here in the top. And when I saw this picture, it's probably one of my favorite photos because, do you spit nails? I kind of wonder, doesn't she look like she could probably spit nails? Yeah, I don't think you want to mess with her. But Colleen and I first met yesterday, and we kind of felt like maybe we had met before. We weren't real sure, but I think it's just that connection with agriculture and the love of the land. And Chris captured, a very short but eloquent quote from Colleen. "The land called me." And I'm sure that most of you know this quote about Montana. "I am in love with Montana. For other states, I have admiration, respect, recognition, even some affection. But with Montana, it is love. And it's difficult to analyze love when you're in it." And I really think Colleen probably exemplifies that. And in her story, you'll hear that. So enjoy.
I can spit nails. And I like to portray myself as a tough cowgirl, but actually I get really weepy. And you and Linda started it, so. I grew up in Highwood, Montana, on a farm and ranch that my ancestors homesteaded in 1898. My mom and dad, Sharon and Bo McGowan, are here. My brother's children are the fifth generation on my family's ranch, and I got to spend last weekend several hours in Highwood celebrating my great aunt Izita McGowan's 100th birthday. And it was such a great gathering, and one of her granddaughters and her husband live in the house that I think was built in 1904, and have remodeled it, and we got to celebrate there under our buffalo jump and with the beautiful barn. And it was so special. And I actually rarely leave home, but from there, my brother and sister and mom and I got in the car and went to Newtown, North Dakota, where we were doing some business of my mom's. And my Aunt Arlie's here. And we talk about the connections, and the interview was so fabulous. And Chris, thank you. Thank you. I'm kind of the informal keeper of our family history, and it was such a blessing to put things on paper and think about them. And one of the questions was, when did your families come? And On my dad's side, they came to Montana in 1898, and on my mom's side, we're indigenous. You know, the Indian people have been here. Nobody knows how long, but it's been a real long time, and that's so special. And one of the things that happened to me last Saturday is our cousin Jim Dawson gave me a hand-carved bear that John Clark, who was in our family, carved. He was an Indian artist. And as you come in, there's a beautiful wooden frieze up high, and that's a John Clark piece. And so a number of our family have a bronze of this bear, and now I'm the proud keeper for my generation of the wooden bear. And it's beautiful. And now I wish I would have left it with my mom because we're flooding. And I think we'll be fine. The house, so my husband and I live south of Browning on the Two Medicine River. We purchased the family ranch from his parents. My sister-in-law, Kristen, is here. She's one of the women behind the ranch and one of the reasons that it still exists in our family. Thank you, Chris. Now I'm going to get weepy. While I'm on thank yous, I'm one of the younger ones up here, so I don't think I had the difficult transition of being a woman in agriculture. I feel like I always was. I say in the book, we didn't really have kindergarten in Highwood, but there was like a homeschool kindergarten, and I refused to go because I preferred to be with Dad. And he let me change duckfoot shovels and grease my own swather and do things that a lot of women didn't do then, and I thank him for that. I think more and more, I think life is cyclical. From the beginning of time, we just keep going through these cycles, and we're so blessed to be in agriculture. And I can't remember if it was Janet or Betty said, the seasons, that I just can't imagine living anywhere where there aren't seasons. We still flood irrigate too. You don't have to know how to fix a pivot if you can carry a shovel. And there really is the sound of that water bringing life to the land and death, because hopefully we're drowning some gophers. It is just fabulous. And the relationships that we have just around this room, I had never met Betty before, and we live just across the Highwood Mountains from Betty. I've known several of her family members as long as I can remember. We have a relationship with the Stuckeys. My dear friend Jane Holzers, who is here with me, her niece-in-law is here, and she's a Stuckey. It's just phenomenal how the ties in agriculture are so widespread. And I think, Denise, you're right. I think I felt like I knew you because you have that calving tan. There was a little script and some questions that Linda had for us, and I think being kind of pioneering women, none of us follow the rules. And so I lost my paper, and I'm not going to follow it. But one thing that they had asked us was to just try to share our lives with you, and I thought, there's so much humor in our lives, and sometimes I feel bad for my husband because he can be pretty cranky, and I think if he just had a dog that loved him best, but they all love me best, and sometimes could see the humor, maybe he wouldn't cuss at me so much. But yeah, ranch life, it's like Montana weather. There is just no typical day. If you don't like it, stick around a day and it'll change. And we're in that weather pattern now. It was a brutal winter. And in Browning, it's often a brutal winter, but this year was memorable. And then my son, who's a senior in high school, is going to go to school in Dickinson, North Dakota. And so we took the train to Williston in February for his scholarship interview, and they don't have wind, apparently, in Malta and Dodsa in those places. And their winter, it looked to me, was far more brutal. The snow was as deep as this table, and they had little paths plowed to feed their cows. And so I got home and called my dear friend Ann Lunick and said, you know, we bitch about the wind all the time, but you should see what it looks like in Malta. And I wish I could remember the story, but she had said there's a story of the Old North Trail from the Shoto area and through the Blackfeet Reservation and up into Canada. And one of the reasons that trail is where it is because the ridges blew clear. So, yeah, she said that too. Be thankful for our rocky ridges and the Old North Trail. So the last 10 days, we had this brutal winter, but our ridges had blown clear, and it's dry. We need rain really bad in some areas, except we're flooding. And we live on the Two Medicine and right on it, and I was trying to decide what to wear, and you have to walk in irrigating boots out to where we're parking our cars, so it was easier to decide what to wear yesterday. My skinny jeans that the irrigating boots fit over. And actually today, if I wasn't here, I'm supposed to be in Shelby, Montana, putting on a high school rodeo. And women in agriculture, my daughter is a sophomore in a sophomore in college, pursuing a degree in veterinary medicine, and she will be the third generation vet in the Gustafson family. Her grandpa Rib was a veterinarian. My husband Bar's a veterinarian. His brother Sid is a veterinarian, and Greta will be the next. And on the McGowan side, my niece is just starting her clinical year at Washington State University as veterinarian. So the love of the land and the love of animals just runs so strongly amongst us, and that's a wonderful thing. But back to the rodeo. She's called several times this morning, and now I've turned my phone off. But I was so touched. She was talking to someone on the phone a couple nights ago, and they were pretty insistent that she was going to go join them in whatever these college kids were going to do now that they're home. And she said, I can't. She said, my mom's going to this book thing, and she's supposed to be putting on this rodeo, and she can do everything, and I'm supposed to be her this weekend. And I thought, well, what a beautiful thing for the next generation of women in agriculture to say and to have that pride and knowledge and Gustafson self-assurance. Arrogance was all I could think of. And there's that too. And her self-insurance, gosh, it comes from a long time ago. Something that Betty said reminded me of this memory, and this might be my favorite memory. I pride myself on being one of the men, and I'm kind of a control freak. So when we brand or ship, I like to have the meals done ahead of time. But then Jane comes and serves them and does all the dishes, and sometimes the laundry if it's piled up enough. But, and hopefully we usually have lots of family and they come the night before, and my mother-in-law was just a tremendous host. And I promised her that when we bought the ranch, we would always try to keep it a family ranch and make sure everybody was welcome, and that we would always have a cocktail party. And so we do, and that makes some extra cooking and some extra work, but it's a joy. But one morning, it wasn't a joy. And I was on a colt that I needed to get on early when there was no one around and do a little groundwork first, especially if there was some extra commotion going on. And my father-in-law, Rib, it was always whether we were riding in the mountains or at work, it was a real source of pride to get there first. So if you're ever going to go on a pleasure ride with Rib, you better like to trot. And in the mountains, whoever got there and got the first fish wins. At branding or shipping, whoever got to the far corner first wins. And so there's all this Gustafson testosterone of who's going to get to the first corner. And I had a little blow up with my dear sister-in-law, Chris, and I think I was crying, and I said, they're all bragging about who gets to the first corner first, and I saddled 7 horses and did this and did that and almost got bucked off. And you know who got to the far corner first? My 6-year-old daughter, Greta. And we're so blessed to have that life. And back to the last 10 days, it's a drought and we need rain and it's flooding. And the shooting stars have come up. My mom's favorite flower is Indian paintbrush, and that doesn't grow on the ranch. It grows 15 miles to the west. And my mother-in-law's favorite wildflower was shooting stars. And they do grow on the ranch. And so in the spring when I was fencing, I'd always pick the first shooting star and either take it to her or press it in a book and get it to her. And so 3 days ago in Tapu when I was fencing and got stuck several times, the last time I got stuck, I stepped out and there was a shooting star. And so Chris, it's being pressed in a book for you. Well, I'm rambling quite a bit here. And I've experienced Betty's horse wreck. My husband and I were set up by my mother-in-law. And it wasn't the first time that I came to the ranch, which we were moving cows. And luckily the horse wreck wasn't that time. But I think it was the next year. And I don't know why I was on the colt, because I'm not the best rider on the ranch. I'm pretty good, but I'm not the best. And I was on this colt that we were riding for somebody else. And our dear friend John Balkenbush was up there helping us. And his dog chased a cow, and she chased it back, and it ran under my horse, and I just got piled so hard. And Rib rode up and looked down and said, "You all right?" And I said, "Yeah." And I heard him telling Pat that night, "Yeah, I think she's going to be all right." So, I don't know. With that, I just can't imagine a better life. I have a dog named Maggie who didn't get to come today because she would have had to swim through the water to get in the car, and she would have been all wet and muddy. But yeah, it's not all good. I heard Betty say, or Donna last night, that they had fun working with their husband, and I can't say that. We love each other dearly, and I have to give him incredible credit. He's not a jerk to our kids. But I think by holding that in, I get the brunt of it. And but it's usually okay, because my dog Maggie rides in the pickup, and she puts her head here on my shoulder, you know, and does the border collie eyes. "I adore you, I adore you." And or in the spring, the miracle of life. It's just, we are blessed to see the miracle of life and to know death. I have a few cows that are pets, probably 10. And I don't know. When we first wean the heifers that we're going to keep, there's always a few that seem kind of inquisitive, so I keep little cake cubes in my pocket, and eventually one of them will become a pet. And no matter how bad a cussing I'm getting, it seems like one of my pets is in the pasture we're in, and she'll come looking for some cake. And you know, if you sit in an office, you just don't have that opportunity. And both our kids are planning to come back to the ranch. One of our rules is they have to have a degree of some kind and work for someone else for several years. And so our daughter is planning to be a veterinarian and wants to come back and run her vet practice and take over her dad's. He's tried to talk her out of being a large animal vet, and she said, "Well, I don't have to have a practice like yours, Dad." And our son is going to Dickinson State to complete his welding degree and farm and ranch management, and he plans to eventually come back and build me some gates and run the ranch. And what a blessing to have that to look forward to for the rest of our lives. So thank you for doing this book and preserving our histories, and thanks for coming.
Thank you, Colleen. All right, we're going to move on to Donna Griffin, and she's from Liberty County Conservation District, and her farm is up by Chester. And in reading her story and listening to her yesterday, I was captivated by her intelligence. My goodness. What she has done with the farming industry on her property, and what she knows and how she's adapted. And I had actually some of my best friends are old ladies. And unfortunately, I lost two of my dear old friends in the last couple of years. One was in her 90s and one was in her late 70s. And it was really hard on me because they were kind of like moms to me. And one of them, her quote was always, "Denise, you need to remember that with change, you need to learn to accept and then adjust. Change, accept, adjust. Life is all about change, accept, adjust." And she had to keep drilling that into my head. And I have to remind myself of that because it is oftentimes difficult to accept the changes that come into our life. And I think Donna can attest to that. But in her quote, she says, "Nature adapts and we have to too." And in Donna's story, obviously her life took some turns that I think that, weren't easy. And to see how she has graced that with humor and perseverance and tenacity and just the resiliency is pretty remarkable. So I know you'll enjoy her story too.
I'm Donna Griffin, and I farm in Liberty and Toole County. No, it's not on. That's better. Oh, okay. I am 72 years old, but I always consider myself in the natural prime, no matter what age I am. I would like to especially thank Linda for her idea. I think it's a wonderful thing, and Denise, Belinda, and Chris especially as well.
Is it
okay.
turned on? Did it maybe get shut off? It's on. Just have to
Talk closer? All right. And I'm very happy to be here with everyone today, acknowledging and celebrating the part of women's contribution to Montana agriculture. And I'd especially like to thank the women that work in all the DNRCS offices, Soil Conservation, FSA, all the research stations throughout the state of Montana. We farmers and ranchers literally couldn't do it without you. And I thank you very much for doing your job so I can do my job as well. My daughter always said we stand on the shoulders of those who go before us. And I have some strong women that went before me that inspire me. And my grandfather Fritz had to leave the farm and work on the railroad during the bad times of the early 1900s. And he left his 18-year-old wife, my grandmother, who had two small sons, 1 and 2 years old, and was pregnant with their third. And she would work the fields and put Dad and Raymond in a box at the end of the field and then threaten them with their death if they crawled out. By the time she got around, they were just starting to get out, she'd say. And on my maternal side, my grandmother was the first child born from a Dutch immigrant family. And she and her husband, Gustafson, ended up in eastern Montana on the last available homestead in Sheridan County. And of course, being the last homestead picked, it obviously wasn't a good piece of ground, had a lot of alkali, light sandy ground. And they struggled out a living there, and grandmother pursued a big garden and chickens and sold produce in town, worked this night shift at a hospital to ensure that her daughters would be college-educated women in a time when education wasn't deemed necessary for women at all. And then there's my mother, who showed me what a true partner in a farm ranch operation was. She and Dad were very close. He did all the outside stuff. She was sort of the business head, and she was always concerned that they'd have enough land for their sons to farm. And Mother would encourage Dad to buy every piece of available land that he could get his hands on. And of course, one of the neighbors once, and I don't think in a flattering manner, called my mother a land hog. And I actually think she wore it with a little bit of pride, but because she did get enough land that both her sons were able to farm and ranch. And as much as I loved the farm and ranch, I knew as a female child I would never be given that opportunity. And so I decided I would pursue a career in medicine, become a doctor. But the summer of my graduation, I was doing barrel racing and just competing in some local moxies, and I happened to notice this really dark, good-looking guy, but there was a few things that weren't quite right. One was he was slightly intoxicated, and the other one, he was riding a very poorly trained Palomino horse. And I love bays and sorrels, and I've always thought Palominos, I'm sorry, Jane, and Pintos were sort of for the dudes, you know. But he was a charming Irishman and pretty good looking, and so we ended up getting married in June of 1964. But I never did forgive. I told him I was able to forgive you for being intoxicated, but riding the Palomino horse, never. So I thought, well, he had just got out of the Navy. He took a college placement test, and he was a brilliant man. And so he could have went in as a second semester juniors. So I said, this will work. I'll be a doctor. You defend me in my malpractice suits. It'll work. But he wanted to get into farming too, so that became our life goal, even though in the 60s they were saying the only way you get into farming is you marry into it or you inherit it. And we didn't have either one of those opportunities. So he worked road construction, and he always worked 2 shifts a day. And then on the weekends, when there was machinery or that kind of thing where he could get time and a half, 2 times his wages, he would volunteer to maintain all the machinery on the construction crew. And so it was 6 years before we finally got the call that would change our lives, and we finally got into farming, and my dad called and said the neighbor was ready to sell. So we bought 640 acres, and there was a 320 lease to it. Well, that obviously wasn't enough land in the 60s or to survive as well, so he started working the night shift at Tiber Dam. They were redoing the spillway. And I milked cows and sold milk, pasteurized milk, sold eggs, sold chickens cut, wrapped, and frozen for pittance, what I would think of today. And my dad, in exchange for using his machinery, Robert had farmed 1,200 acres of his, and then also worked as a non-paid employee for several years. We were very grateful that we were able to get into farming finally. And over the time, we increased our acreage in farming and diversified into cattle, and ended up with 250 mother cows and a beautiful ranch on Mount Lebanon. Unfortunately, when my husband died, and I think the advice is wise to never make a decision when you're at a very difficult point in your life, but I just couldn't get enough help. My son and I had a lot of farm ground to do, and I sold the ranch, something I've always regretted. And I think now I would have had the strength maybe a little later to somehow find some solution to that I never would have had to sell that land. So then my son and I continued on farming. He had his own place, and we had ours, and we had bought the one at Etheridge in a partnership. And then 4 years later, he passed away as well. So right now, at this time, the farm consists of 7,000 acres of farm ground. And I did keep the horses from the ranch, and they're my hobby, which I wish I had more time to spend on. But my dad was a very interesting man. You look at him, he was a German, tough, not one prone to romanticism at all, but he had a real love for the animals. He had uncanny knowledge about where they were and how many he had, and he would talk about the excellent whitetail buck, and that was good. And he was even known to actually move a bird's nest when he was summer falling from one swath to another, so he didn't want to destroy that bird's nest. And he gave me the first idea of our role of stewardship when you have your land, and that I heard him talking to some of his friends and saying, well, I hope they don't shoot that buck over on Eagle Creek because he should be left to breed and reproduce. And, I hope those young bucks aren't over hunting the coyotes because they're important. He always understood the balance of nature and how it was all intermixed, and the nice den of fox, along the road there. He was hoping that we were a little short that year. And he did the best in conservation at that time, which was keeping all your weeds out. You'd never found a weed on any of his fields. He was a real workaholic. And I think it's interesting when we look at what I think most farmers and ranchers want to do the best for their ground. But the idea of what is the best conservation practice has changed with history. My grandmother Rue and Westby talking about Gustafson burning the stubble. My dad believed in a 50-50. 50 was left fallow and 50 was seeded every year. And in Robert and our time, it was the switch from summer fallow to chemical fallow was the best way to conserve your ground. And now, of course, we're looking at the thing of soil health, the concept which you more closely, we believe now, follow nature, keeping the land covered and growing a variety of different crops. and ecosystem. And that is what I'm committed my farm to, is the complete concept of soil health. And we have rotation. I do 1/3 of pulse crops, which would be lentils, chickpeas, that kind of thing, add nitrogen back to the soil, just take the moisture from the top. Then 1/3 is into oil seeds, which is mustard or canola, that are deeply rooted, and then go back to cereal grains. And it's an exciting time to be in agriculture. There's so much new research is being done, and there's always an opportunity to learn. I think we women have struggled here today saying what our land means to us, what this relationship with this land, and how do you describe something that is such a part of you, that you breathe, sleep, and are dependent upon, and love, and talking about the wildflowers. How do we describe? It is indescribable. And I think the closest words I've ever come to is thinking it's a symbiotic relationship, meaning that we're both gaining from that relationship. And I do my best to preserve and save my land. And I take very seriously, my responsibility now. Who do I hand this land off to that is going to cherish it like we did, who's going to care for it, who's going to do the right conservation practices, and who will keep it in a family situation? I would hate to see my farm end up being just a straight business. I'd like to give other young people that opportunity. And like I said, the land has done so much for me. It enabled me to live with a wonderful man and be his partner, work alongside him day in, day out for 45 years. It allowed me to raise my 2 children, to show them the wonder of nature, teach them the work ethic and cooperation. And I think I ran across a poem a few years ago by David Bouchard, and he lives in Alberta, Canada, not too far from, right across the line from where I live, actually. And I'd like to just read you part of that. I think it's very indicative of a relationship with the land. If you're not from the prairie, you don't know me. You just can't know me. You see, my hair's mostly wind, my eyes filled with grit. My skin's red or brown, my lips chapped and split. I've lain on the prairie and heard grasses sigh. I've stared at the vast open bowl of a sky. I've seen all those castles and faces and clouds. My home is the prairie, and I cry out loud. If you're not from the prairie, you can't know my soul. You don't know our blizzards. You've not fought our cold. You can't know my mind, nor ever my heart, unless deep within you there's somehow a part of these things that I said that I know. The wind, sky, and earth, the storms and the snow. Best say that you have, and then we'll be one, for we will have saved that same blazing sun. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. Our next speaker will be Lorraine Johnson from Eastern Sanders County Conservation District, and I've enjoyed visiting with you the last couple days, Lorraine. And a quote that really stuck out to me in her story was, conservation was always part of Lorraine's approach to living on the land. Probably the biggest thing I learned growing up with my mother, who was a full-blood Native American, was to leave things better or back to the way that nature intended them to be. And you can tell in reading her story and where she lives that she has worked very hard at doing that, and it's nice to see her honor that land, and I'm sure that you're going to enjoy listening to her story about that.
Good morning. Listening to these ladies, I don't think I do half as much work as they do. Oh, my name is Lorraine Johnson, as she said, Mrs. George Johnson. Some people may think I never had a husband because I'm always saying I, and it really means we or us. And so I was born at Arley, and we tell people on the way to church. So my mother was a lady who prayed every night. The Jesuit priests came in, and of course everybody had to become a Catholic. And George became a Catholic so he could marry me. But I don't know, these ladies talk about third, fourth, fifth, sixth generation. I may be third. My grandfather was white. He came from Missouri. He came here when he was 11 years old. We do not know anything beyond that on that side of the family. He came to the reservation, married my grandmother, a full-blooded Native American, and my grandpa had not a large ranch, and so that's where my dad grew up. My mom lived across the field at another place, and so my dad lost his mother when he was very young, and so it was a real struggle. A lot of going without, a lot of being hungry, and I said, that's why I have this, is because my dad said and vowed that he would never be hungry again. Well, on a ranch, you work hard, so you got to eat like a horse, you know. And so by the time that I graduated from high school, my dad was a slave driver, cussed a lot. My mother was exactly the opposite, a very loving, quiet, hard-working person. And so by the time I was through high school, I had vowed I would never, ever, ever marry a rancher. And so when George and I had been going together for a while, when we discussed marriage, and I told him, no, I will never, ever marry a rancher. And he said, I'm not going to be one. So for the first 3 years of our married life, we were not ranchers. We were, because he came from a ranching family from the Flathead and later Eureka. Then they moved down to be our neighbors. And so for 3 years, we lived off the ranch, didn't have a ranch. When we got married, I had 2 cows, and that was our start. But I was fortunate enough to live where everyone knew everyone else. And so when we got our start in ranching, we didn't have anything other than 2 cows and a car. And but we know the people on the credit board for the tribe. And when we went there, how's your mom? How's your dad? How's this? How's that? And we left. There was not one word said about what are you going to do, how are you going to pay it back, or anything. And so when we got outside, George says, what happened? I said, don't worry about it, it's okay. And so we bought 80 acres, and it had 27 cows, and they were pretty much all milk cows. And I had learned to milk cows as a kid because even in high school, get up in the morning and milk your cows and then try to clean up so you could go to school and then not smell like a cow. And so then we had to have George work out. And so we had, instead of me milking cows, we bought extra calves to put on the cows. And yeah, we were not going to do chores. No chickens, no pigs, no whatever. I had learned all that, and I wasn't going to do it again. So we went looking at larger ranches when we didn't have the gas hardly to pay to go look. But we had a dream, and there was even a man who said that he would help us to do this. So George got another job driving chip truck, and it was very good money. Well, it was unheard of to have 3 or 4 paychecks laying on the counter that we hadn't put in the bank. That was really, successful. And today I wonder what went wrong. Where are we? And so, as I said, we had gone looking at different places, and the ranch we're on today, we went with my mom and dad to look at it. And for Dad was interested in buying it, which he did. So my two brothers tried living there, and for various reasons, they ended up leaving. And so one day my mom was having surgery in Missoula, and so I went in to be with Dad during surgery, and we're sitting there talking, and he said, I'm going to sell Camas Prairie. And I don't know where the words came from, popped out, which they usually do. And so I said, I think I deserve a chance, and one chance only. Or he said, okay, one chance only. And we bought it, went through the tribe as far as a contract, and when George came home from driving truck that day, I said, I bought a ranch today. And he says, okay, where is it? So we moved to Camas Prairie in 1972. 73 was a drought year, and so we borrowed money, and we bought cows and the place from my dad. And so that worked out a lot better than my brothers trying to work for him. And so we were there for several years, and a neighbor down the road drove a truck, and George said, if they ever need help for a day or two, he says, I could do that. So they called him one day, and 20 years later, he quit, you know. But in those 20 years, then, our kids had grown up and left home, and I was the boss, the labor force. I was everything. George would come home on weekends and usually worked. I would tell him what needed to be done, or he knew what needed to be done. So for a long time, he didn't have a day off. It was day in, day out, every day. And so things, we had our good years, we had bad years, because when you live on Camas Prairie, that's a geological site. The university, I don't know if they still do, but bring busloads of kids out. And that's when Lake Missoula, it was like part of Lake Missoula, and then the dam broke and the water rushed out, so you have these little ridges, these hills, and a lot of soil that is not good for farming. And there's two almost like divisions on the prairie. You can farm part of it, but we're so blessed to live on the rocky end. We didn't know that when we bought it, and we worked up a piece once, and I think 44 loads of rock later, we knew we weren't going to do that again. And so George being gone all the time, the kids gone all the time, so I was home, and one day I said, Lord, I sure would like to do something to get off the prairie once in a while. And years later, I remembered that, because next thing I knew, our county commissioner asked me if I would be on a Forest Service board. I passed the background check, got on that one, and pretty soon I was on this one. I was on our district board, then come to Helena for meetings here on the state level. And so everything was going fine. One day, George had a stroke. You see him with his walker. That's only slowed him down a little. He takes his walker, goes out, and they fixed a place. He hangs it on the tractor, and he can go all day. And just a couple days ago, he was out spraying weeds all day. So, and then about 4.5 years ago, I had a massive heart attack. They told my family I had 2 to 10 days to live. Obviously, they're wrong. But then George, when he had his stroke, or he had a AAA they gave him no chance. He says he will not make it through the night. He will not make it through surgery. So he's still here. But through it all, we learned. We even went to Ranching for Profit school. A lot. You're all laughing because you know that's a joke. But that's the name of the class. And a lot of the things that they teach does not fit Camas Prairie. On the boards, I learned about no-till farming. That does not fit Camas Prairie. I learned about intensive grazing. That does not work. And so a lot of the things we had to figure out for ourselves, and mostly in just moving our cattle from pasture to pasture. We lease something like 23,000 acres. Most that's from the tribe that on the Flathead Reservation, and so we own property. We are what they call it, land rich, cash poor. And so in talking with these ladies, just in visiting, people think we are so lucky to live where we do, and we are, but we pay a price. We go without, we become hoarders, you reuse, you just put it away, and someday you're going to need it. And I found out that one of these ladies had been to a thrift store, and I thought, my kind of woman. And you learn to go yard sailing. And I even have George going now because I'm the driver. And he's found out they have tools. They have fishing stuff. They have man stuff. And so I said, as far as the land, you probably figured it out. It's a love-hate relationship. There are days when things are going good. Oh, you are so blessed to live here. And then when things are going bad, you're in a drought, you're in a blizzard like we were this year. The blizzard just seemed like it was never going to end. And you wonder if you've got rocks in your head for staying. And people keep asking us, when are you moving to town? I said, probably in Pine Box. George fell in love with Camas Prairie. I never really for a long time. My idea of ranching is where it's green. And when he retired from trucking, I thought, boy, it's my time. I get to move. No, that never happened. So when I had the heart attack and he had his stroke, that would have seemed like to be the obvious time to sell out and move to town. But I guess in a way, that's where our heart is. That's where we'll probably be. We figured this out. We can sell our cattle, we can lease out the land, we can hire somebody to come in and take care of us if and when that time comes. So I guess we got rid of the hate part and just love the land. And for our children to ever take over, I really can't see that happening. They have other interests, they have their own life, and right now we have our middle son living with us. He's had a divorce, so he's there. We call him our caregiver, and I think we're taking care of him, but but he does most of the physical work, and so I just have, as far as just like living day to day, Every day is Thanksgiving at our house. Our eyes opened this morning. And so we're grateful and thankful, and we have no plans except to just keep on doing what we're doing. And so the things that we have learned and the stuff like that I tell people, behind every successful woman or man is a pushy woman, you know. And so I have told George when he was driving truck, I bought the place. If you come home and I say I sold it, I sold it. You know? And when we did have opportunities to sell, we didn't want to. And then when I wanted to, they weren't there. So we just keep on doing what we're doing as far as the land is concerned. And I would, any advice that I would give you would be, as Colleen said, get your estate in order. That George and I have made out our wills. I think we're going to do it now again for about the third time. People change. Circumstances change. And the other thing I would tell you to do is to have fun. George was the oldest in his family. I was the oldest. And I said, we have been responsible for our whole life. And I said, if you know how to have fun, would you please tell us? We don't golf. We don't do so many things that people do at their leisure time, and so tell people just and I'm so tired of cooking. I said, just give me your grocery list, trade with me. But I said, I've cooked 1 million meals because my folks had a place, or a hunting camp in the Bob Marshall Wilderness, and so for about 20 years, George and I helped, and there were years my mother got sick and had to come out, and by coming out, that means we went in at Seeley Lake over Pyramid, 20 miles into camp on horseback. So it got to be to where I was taking over more and more, and so I could plan for about 15 people for at least 10 days to 2 weeks at a time, to so we could take hunters in. And so I was kind of used to that. We had 4 kids, and three being boys. There was always kids, and so they would always the kids would come to our house because the kids had built their own arena, and so we never knew how many kids were going to be there after for supper. And I had to go buy bigger pots and pans, and but it was a good way to raise our kids. They learned good work ethics, and so they're not, of course, rodeoing any. That didn't last very long. I said, I wish they'd learned how to play golf or tennis, something they could do their whole life. But it's been a good life, off and on. And so I have really enjoyed these ladies, and I think I appreciate my own life more now. And in talking to Dorothy, I feel like I'm really a slacker. I said, she has shamed me. I had to ask her this morning, what time do you get up? And what time do you go to bed? But I found out we both like word searches and stuff like that. She says she does it to exercise her mind, and so I think farming and ranching, you get a lot of that. But this has just been so much fun. I'd really try to talk Linda out of finding someone else instead of me. I even gave her a name or two. And through her persistence, I'm here today, and I wouldn't have missed it.
Thank you, Lorraine. She definitely has a great sense of humor. I think she could be a stand-up comedian, honestly. Thank you. Our next lady is Glenna Stuckey from the Avon country, and I was able to get my book, all my autographs yesterday, and in Glenna signing mine, she said, "May our lifestyle remain alive and healthy." And I totally agree. I hope that that happens. And many of you have probably heard about the Stuckeys, and they had a documentary I think that they were included in that was on TV a couple years ago. And when Glenna visits with you and shares her story, I was captivated by your love of haying season. And so I'm looking forward to hearing about that.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me very okay? All right. There's not one day that I do not get up and thank the good Lord over and over and over for allowing me to be where I am near Avon, Montana, and have my family mostly there and such a support group. You can't imagine what a blessing that is. Earl and I grew up in the Galton Valley, and actually 4-H was a big part of our lives, and we were actually members of the same 4-H club from the time we were about 9, 10 years old, and we just kind of grew up together. I chased him for years and years, and finally caught up with them in 1954, and we got married and lived at Galton Gateway for a while. We did lots of different things to start to be able to make a living. We had a few cows that increased a little bit every year. We guided hunters up the Galton Canyon. One year we had 30 doctors and lawyers from Georgia, and you can imagine what an experience that was. Anyway, we went on for that, and then after about 12 years, Earl had an opportunity to become a cow boss for the Flying D Ranch, and we moved over to the Madison and lived right on Cherry Creek. So our kids at that time went to Harrison to school. It was a drive. They all learned to drive and from the time they could get behind a steering wheel and keep something in the road. I mean, that was just the way we were. We had to drive lots of miles. After we moved our cows around from different places to find grass, so we trailed cows. Earl would be up at the cow camp in the summer, and the kids and I would trail cows around wherever we could find pasture. It's just about the same way as it is today. Try to find grass for the cows. After a while, we had an opportunity to look at a place at Avon that was owned by the Kiley Ranch, and Ted Kiley and his wife had lived there since their family homesteaded, and they did not have any children, and they were wanting to get out of the ranching business, and so we were so very fortunate to be able to lease that place for a few years and eventually sign our names onto it. And we may never get it all paid for, but that's the kids' problems down the line. We've done lots of things over the years. Earl and I work together. We don't always go about things the same direction, but we usually end up with the same result. So that's one thing. I have to tell one little story about chores. You know, we all have chores to do: wood to chop, water to pack at different times, things to feed. Everything's always hungry. One time, it reminds me of Mother's Day, which is tomorrow. I had griped about I needed a new axe or something at the woodshed, and so my gift for Mother's Day was a splitting maul and a wedge. and I treasured those, and I still have them and use them. So how about that? That's the way it goes. we have wonderful family. I mean, you can't imagine what a wonderful family support we have. We have 5 kids, 4 daughters and 1 son, and most of them live close to us, and most of them are involved in agriculture because that's the way they grew up, and that's the way we taught them that this is the best place to be. But we do have 1 daughter who is an engineer for Burlington Northern, and so she does that. And so we're all just going at everything the way it should be every day. We are so fortunate, and I love the community where we live. We have Angus cattle. We don't farm because we just live in a place where grass grows, and so we don't do any farming. Seasons are way too short. It's an absolute incredible lifestyle, and I am just overly thankful all of the time for everything that we have. And I'm a member of the National Cattlewomen's Association, the Montana Cattlewomen's. We belong to Montana Stock Growers. I think all of us involved in agriculture need to band together and make everybody aware of our challenges, but also our blessings. So thank you very much for coming today. This has been a real treat.
Thank you, Glenna. So our last lady is Dorothy Han, and she's actually from Townsend, where I live. Before we get to Dorothy, I know Linda mentioned that Pauline Webb was actually one of the first women that we interviewed and kind of helped get the ball rolling. She was, I called her kind of our poster child getting started. And one of the quotes from Pauline that was probably one of my favorite quotes of all the stories that we've covered is, so you see, my life was good. God has been good to me. I'm just a ranch woman. I won't go down in history, but I'm one of Townsend and Montana's people. And if you had the pleasure of listening to Pauline speak, she was a storyteller, a remarkable storyteller. And as Linda said, to see middle school children captivated by an old lady with a bunch of hats was pretty remarkable. And so in Townsend, we've covered quite a few folks. We didn't do as many as Belinda as far as oral history stories from Glacier, but we were able to get some of their stories or little snippets of Barbara Kirscher and Diana Gravely and Peggy Cootie. And of course, Dorothy is in there, and she has a story, quite a remarkable story. If there is a matriarch for a community, Dorothy would be our matriarch in Broadwater County. And everybody knows her, and she makes herself known, and she does it very easily. She makes the best pies. Whenever there's an auction of any kind, everybody wants one of Dorothy's pies, and I know that they have gone for an extreme amount of money. And she even went to the legislature to fight for the right to make pies and have potlucks and bake sales and all of those things. And but Dorothy is just one of the most giving women you could ever have the pleasure of knowing. On Sundays, she makes her rounds to the rest homes in Townsend to visit everybody. And she does work extremely hard, has always worked extremely hard. And you can see the joy that she has for what she has done her entire life. And if I could esteem to be anybody when I got old, I would want to be Dorothy. And we've had so much fun with her, and she goes to all the sporting events. In fact, she's broken her hip once or twice. Once, okay, and then that was after a basketball tournament. She was walking out of the gym. And a couple years ago, when we had a really good basketball team and we won the district tournament, Dorothy was in the photo with the girls' basketball team. Because we just love having her at all the games. And so I know you're going to enjoy her story. One thing that really caught my attention that I didn't realize until we started interviewing her was that her husband was 26 years older than her. But the respect that he had for Dorothy in making his decisions was just impeccable. So
Well, I'm Dorothy Han, and I live 2 miles south of Townsend on a ranch and in my own home, and I still take care of myself. And I have my dryers down in the basement, and I have 12 steps down and 12 back up. And I do those 5 and 6 times a day because my freezer's down there, my walk-in cooler, and all my canned goods. But I wanted to say that about Pauline and I had a lot in common. She came from Iowa. I came from Iowa. We both married ranchers, and we both had 2 boys and a girl. And we had a wonderful life together because we were great friends. But I wanted to say that I enjoyed the ranch very much. I loved ranching. And when we were flooded out by the Canyon Ferry Lake, and we had 1,100 acres, and we had 1,100 head of sheep down there. And then, of course, some of them went to the forest in the summertime. But we had a few head of cattle, and we raised lots of grain and hay. And it was alfalfa hay, and then we had wild hay too. But I worked in the fields all the time. And I would get up at 5 o'clock every morning because we had milk cows, and I had 100 laying hens, and I had 500 fryers when I lived down where the ranch is, where we did live. And Paul and I we would butcher those ourselves and take them to the Montana Club in Helena because they had picnics in the summer. And we would do 125 one day, and we had a screened-in porch around our house, and we had water that was ice-cold water. It was spring water. And so we just put those in tubs for overnight. We got up the next morning, and we did 75 more. Then we took them to Helena so they could have them at Montana Club. And we were so sorry to have to leave that ranch because we could raise all the hay, the grain, and everything we needed for those sheep and cattle. And the cattle didn't have to go to the forest. We owned islands just at the lower end of our place, and we could turn the cattle on there, and then they could come in easy in the fall. And I helped with everything. I ran the machinery. I even ran a little D2 caterpillar. And then Bev, my daughter, and my oldest son were born there at the old ranch. But then when we moved up what we are now, it was only 347 acres because we had to go someplace. They were pushing us off. And so then we had to buy a lot more land to run our livestock, and we had to sell our sheep because we didn't have any place to go with them. And we always took care of the land and worked it and irrigated. And we had 1,000-inch water right out of the Missouri River. And when the government took our land, they took that. And they also took our scales that was certified to weigh a whole bunch of calves. And nobody knows, but those are all under the lake. They wouldn't let us take them, and all the fences. And if anybody drowns in that place, they'll never find them because the wire was real heavy wire, and it never wouldn't rust at all. It just never rusted. And so anyway, we had to make a new life for ourselves. And then we bought the land that we bought 2 miles south of town. We own a little piece across the highway, and then be darned if they didn't work on the highway, and then we had to give part of that land for the road. But anyway, we keep going. And of course, my husband died 34 years ago, and so I worked to help my sons work in the field, but I worked in the field all the time, and I'd come home and I cooked 3 big meals a day, always. And when we moved cattle, I rode horseback, and Paul and I never used a dog. We didn't have anybody in the corrals. We had to cut them out. We just did it ourselves, and we worked them very quietly, never had a bit of trouble. Now people have these dogs and everything, and I was going to say down there at the other ranch, I went outside one morning, and went back in the house, and I said, Paul, there's a bear out there in the tree. He said, oh, there isn't any bear out there. And sure enough, it was a cub, and his mouth was full of porcupine quills. So he roped it, and we had a school bell on an iron post, and so he snubbed it up to that, and he pulled all the quills out. And then we had a little building that was like a brooder house, and the windows had iron bars on them. So he took the little bear and put it down there, and then he fed it every day, and that little bear got so he'd bring the pan over to him. Well, then one day the bear got out, and he went up there and killed 2 sheep of ours. He said, I'm paying you back for putting me in this block place. And then, I always helped Paul in the fields, of course, and he even worked up one field that was down at the other ranch, and it was beautiful soil. Oh, that was just black as could be. It was the most wonderful soil. And he put it into oats, and it made 100 bushel to the acre. And so that was good. And then where we are now, we went out in the wintertime and had to load up the hay. And so we went out, and it had snowed a whole bunch. We had to shovel to get into the stack. And while we were loading, it filled it full. We had to shovel to get back out. And people don't realize that they complain when they get about 5 inches of snow. And my gosh, we had it 30 below at 2 weeks for straight. And then it would be lots and lots of snow. You'd have to make tunnels someplace. But we always took care of the land and worked hard to do irrigation and see that everything was taken care of. And fences, we wanted to have good fences because that makes good neighbors, because you don't want your stuff getting on their place. And I have to tell you something funny. I was supposed to, the cattle women were going to serve a dinner at the out at the fairgrounds at the 4-H building, and we were supposed to make food. Well, I had food made, but I had to go out and take care of the chickens before I left. And I had 2 doors. There was a screened-in door on the inside, and then the outside door had just a little wooden thing. Well, my grandson, he goes, and I didn't know this, he fastened it tighter. So I go in and I pull that door like that. Oh, I'm locked in the chicken house. And here it is, cold. And I wasn't even dressed, you know, warm, because I was just going to run out there and back. And so I thought, I don't want to roost up there with those chickens. and the front part, there was two parts. And the front part had screened on it, you know, and I couldn't get those open. And so I went to the back part, and we had windows that were only about so deep, and then they slid. And I thought, well, I'll try that. So I did. And then I had to jump up, go up, and then jump down. And by golly, that window wasn't very big, you know. Wide, I mean deep. And by gosh, I did it. And I didn't even sprain an ankle. So I made it out there, and I told the gals about it, and they all laughed. but my husband was one to do, he'd work all hours. We were always up at 5 o'clock, and we worked in the fields till way late. And then we had our milk cows to milk, and I had my chickens to take care of, and I had a few head of sheep at that time. And so what was I going to say? Gosh.
Dorothy, tell them about the egg deliveries on Friday.
Oh, yes, I had those 100 laying hens, and I delivered eggs on Friday night after supper, and I did that for 40 years. And I just quit about 2000 because my guys didn't want me to have chickens, because they said, we haven't got time to take care of those when you're gone or someplace. But what got me was I would go, you know, and they'd say, come on in, so they could get the money for me. And here would be all the dirty dishes on the table from supper. The young gals are sitting in there watching TV, their daughters. My gosh. Well, my daughter, I had my youngest son in March, and I didn't go to the field that year, but the next year I did. And Bev was only 11 years old, and she took care of John, and she cooked the noon meal, everything. And she had that ready at 12 o'clock, and we always went in at 12. And my gosh, you know, and she would do all kinds of stuff. She said, have you got any ironing, Mom? She loved to iron. But she was a nurse at St. Pete's in 68, 69, 70, and 71. And she graduated from Bozeman, and she had only been working there 6 months, and they made her head nurse on medical extension, which was something. And she got $324 a month. Boy, I tell you. Oh. Well, and I graduated from high school in Iowa. I was 16 years old. I was valedictorian of my class, but I didn't get to go to college because there was no money. There was 7 of us kids, and my dad was a section foreman on the railroad, and he didn't make much. And the one winter, they cut him down to 3 days' work a week, and he couldn't even buy me a winter coat. I just had a heavy wool sweater with a lining in it, and it was 30 below, and I walked to school with that. And I delivered papers all through high school, and I cleaned a lady's house on Saturdays, and I got 50 cents. I babysat from 8 in the evening until 2 in the morning. I got 50 cents. And I did an ironing for a lady, and I got 50 cents. But, you know, I didn't think anything about it. I'm buying some clothes for myself. But I had to save up. I only had probably 2 dresses to wear to school because it was kind of bad sometimes. And then my papers, there was 3 other little towns. I came from a little town in Iowa, and they had these the other 3 towns to take the papers to, and they brought them to the grocery stores. And the side roads were so bad, you know, the county roads, that they had a heck of a time getting through, and my paper didn't come in till 9 o'clock at night. And I had to walk over that whole little town. I'd had to walk clear out towards the cemetery, clear to that was on the south end, and then the north end of town as far as you could go. And then all the streets that went the other direction. And I delivered those with a bad blizzard. I couldn't hardly see a hand in front of me. But nowadays, they would take their kids around. Not our car was only moved off by the house only when we had to go to Fairfield, a bigger town, to buy something, clothes or something like that. But anyway, Paul was a hard worker, and we never had an argument. And we always talked everything over. And when a buyer would come to buy the calves, he would make an offer, and Paul would say, I've got to go and talk to Dorothy. They said, what do you have to do that for? He said, because we're in this together, and we want to make the decisions together. And he was always trying to make the land better. And then I have my both of my sons are on the ranch, and I have 3 grandsons. They went to college, and they came back to ranch. And they're really good, too, and they're hard workers, and anything they have to do, they do it. And they're real good to me, too. They're always real good. But we have always done, they got an award from the state. Do you know what that was called?
Oh, the Stewardship Award.
Stewardship Award. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they went to Billings and they received that. And they try to take care of the land, and we always did. No matter what we did, we always tried to take care of the land. And because there's never going to be any more land, and I'm not happy with all this subdivision because they're selling their ranch land. But we have put our land up. It's White Horse, Kimber Gulch, and Kelly. Got a frog. And so and if we ever sold that land, it's about 1,600 acres, I think. And we would, if anybody bought it, the only thing they could put would be one house on it. They can never, ever subdivide it. And the more people should do that, because these people are selling their good little ranches. And then look at out between Townsend and out a ways going towards Helena. They have put up more subdivisions. It's terrible. And they're taking, even the antelope aren't even going to have a place pretty soon. Well, we have plenty of trouble with the deer. We had, gosh, it was 3,000 or 4,000 acres. No, not that much. It was around, I guess this place was 50 acres down towards our grain bins, and the darn white-tailed deer, they run through it. They sleep in it. They don't run through the same place twice, and they cost us to lose $3,000 worth of grain because they went and ran through it right when we were going to combine it, shattered it all. And they come and eat everything. They eat our hay that is chopped, and that's kind of bad. But I don't know. But I know that we have done a lot to keep the land going and keep it in good shape. And it's just one of those things, I guess. You have no control over what people are going to do. They take your land and they do this and they do that. But
Well, thank you, Dorothy.
Yep.
She's definitely set a great example. When Chris asked Dorothy what legacy she wanted to leave, she said, "I'd just like to see my grandchildren continue to be ranchers and to take good care of the land and make a pie once in a while." Linda? Okay. Are there any questions? We'll open up for questions, and the ladies can answer your questions for how long are you going to do that for, Linda? 10, 15 minutes? So are there any questions for any of the ladies? Yes?
When does the movie come out? You want to see the movie or a documentary?
Well, I have to say, this is no joke. It's a inquiry already from, I'm getting the book reviewers in different newspapers and magazines to do book reviews for us. And a man that runs the magazine says, I'm also a documentary producer. So I think this would make a great documentary. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Don't encourage her. We want you on film.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you. All right. So the people out in the other room couldn't hear the question, and so the question was, when is the movie going to be out? So, and Linda, I think, spoke loud enough to say that actually there might. I don't. Okay. Linda, do you want to repeat what your answer was?
For those of you sitting in the lobby, there was a question, when is there a movie coming out? And I have been working to get book reviewers and magazines and newspapers to do book reviews. And one of the magazine editors says, I'm also a documentary producer. This may have potential.
Any other questions? One story that I didn't get to hear that I remember was the story with Cora with shooting gophers. Could you tell that story real quick? I really like that story.
My mom and dad, when they were first married, really had no money. And so for entertainment on the evenings, they would go out and shoot gophers. And my mom was a town girl. She grew up in Harlow, but had no ag background. So Dad was teaching her, and she was getting pretty good. So they would have contests to see who could shoot the most gophers. And this one night, Mom was really hot. You know, they were tied at 10 apiece, and so they said, well, okay, one more time. So Mom shot, and she killed her gopher, and she goes, well, he can't beat me. I'll either tie or I'll win. So Dad shot, and he killed 2. So Mom lost.
Yes? Okay. Dorothy's so shy.
have to tell you, my husband said, now if you ever, I had a 410, and we had trouble with the sparrows all around the barn. They would make messes, you know, and everything. And he said, when you shoot at a group, don't shoot at the whole group. Just pick one out. So these sparrows were just scads of them over there by the barn. So I took the 410 and I just picked out one. I got 12. And I used to always hunt elk too. I climbed those mountains till I was 70 years old.
Awesome. Thanks, Dorothy. Glenna, did you have something else to add? Are you a hunter?
Well, I do like to shoot. I shoot skunks if they get in my barn, if there's an opportunity. I have a pistol that's Earl's and I use it. And so everybody gives me a bad time about not to fool around, but I guess that's just the way it is. You've got to protect your property.
Can you tell the story about your haying and what you do real quick? Because you shared that yesterday. I enjoyed that.
Oh, yes. Well, we do put up loose hay with beaver slide stackers. And one of my favorite jobs has always been driving a buck rake. And I have a buck rake that was made by Earl and his brother before we ever moved to Avon, way back when we lived in Galton Gateway. And so we still have it, and they let me drive it some of the time.
Great. Any other questions for the ladies? Yes.
I really hesitate to ask because I know you all love being on the land, and when I loved it. But if you could take 1 week, just 1 week, and know you'd come back, is there something you've always wanted to do or see, or some place that you could just dip over to and see some other thing, or another farm in another country, or?
All right, so the question is, for any of the women, they love the land, they love what they do, but if they had 1 week that they could go anywhere, see anything, do anything, what would that be? Anywhere in the world? Go ahead, Colleen.
That's a great question. And I think this is quite ironic, but we have some friends from France who have an American-style dude ranch and a commercial cow ranch in France. And we teased my daughter. She got to go to France, and she liked Paris, but she loved going to Balamboise Ranch. And I have to admit the same. So they've sent all of their children, and in many of the European universities, they must do an out-of-country externship. And so we've been so lucky to have, 8 or 10 or 12 French students come usually on 3-month visas to spend time with us. And of all the places to go in the world, I would love to go to their ranch.
Anybody else? Betty?
I don't really have any.
No?
Well, I have the mic. I need to tell a story on Betty. I'm a pretty good horseman, but I'm a terrible roper. And last night, Betty told us when she met her husband, Steve, she was roping and he was mugging at a branding. And I just think she's my hero.
Donna, do you have a place that you would like to go? You talk into the mic, if you don't mind. Thank you.
I usually try to travel internationally at least once a year, and but in particular, no, I'm pretty content where I'm at.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Janet, you probably as well. Yeah. Lorraine or Glenna?
I don't march to the same drummer. I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, we had the opportunity to go to the gardens at Victoria in Canada. So if I had a chance, I think of I would live next door there. Or, when we ever get to move to town, it's going to be next to a greenhouse.
All right. Lorraine's mic is dying, but basically she would like to go to Victoria, Canada, and if she moves anywhere, she's going to live next to a greenhouse. Do you have a green thumb? Okay, and Glenna, real quick, where would you like to go?
I'm not much of a traveler. Our trips are short, close by. I have no idea. I have no I would not want to go and spend a week anywhere but at home.
All right. So now, Linda, I believe you're going to have an opportunity for folks to sign. Okay, go ahead. Why don't you come take over, because I'm not quite sure what you're doing next. Do you want to come use this mic? Because I think that one's dying.
Well, I just want to say a couple things before we turn it over to Rod from the bookstore, because the books are going to be on sale there. And you can buy them, and these wonderful, wonderful storytellers are going to be out front signing your books, as well as our author and the other three women that are here as the quote ladies. I call them the chapter ladies and the quote ladies. But one thing I'm going to let you all know, and our panel will probably be impressed, is the Historical Society has been filming this. And so this will eventually be put on YouTube. So you tell your friends and relatives to watch this. This has been a wonderful, wonderful few hours of hearing these wonderful stories, and they're also displayed in the book, and so it's been a great pleasure to see and listen to them and read them. And so I want to introduce Rod, because he has books for sale, and we will, after it's over, go buy your book if you don't have one, and then we'll have the ladies go out to the main lobby, and there's also refreshments. Those are compliments of the Historical Society's volunteers, and we want to thank them because they made some wonderful cookies and punch for us. And so it's pretty much open to do book signing and visiting and getting to know. And I think maybe Glenna might have to take off. She has a funeral service to go to. So they'll probably have to be leaving pretty quickly. But thank you to all of you who came and shared your stories and made us laugh. It was wonderful. Let's give them a hand. I'll let Rod tell you where the books are going to be sold at. So, Rod?
Yes. As we take a break here, we have the book signing set up in the lobby. If you ladies would like to come out, I have a book signing table for you there. And we have restrooms available at the back of the lobby, as well as refreshments. And books are in the museum store. And if we can help at all, we'd like you to enjoy your afternoon at Montana's Museum. We are open for the rest of the day until 5 o'clock, and it is a free day at the museum. And we'd also like you to consider becoming a sustaining member and continuing to help us preserve history. So please come and have
Thank you.
some refreshments.
Thank you.
Betty, I'm a friend of Tara's. I'm a friend of Tara's. We went to Forage Camp together.
Okay.
And I'm Miss Silver.
Right, because I've seen you up there too. And I know your dad's kid.
So you see here, it's on the left side of South Townsend, I think about 5 or 6.
But
I never got to ask.
yes, I'm glad
I
you
know
guys
she sent
came.
emails.
Jane probably made it.
No, it wasn't Jane. I had no idea she was coming.
No, I think we'll just leave this one off because everybody will go out.
Yes, I'm Tara's grandma.
Thank you for your technical and IT stuff. When will it go up to YouTube?
You'll get to see. Yeah. So did you enjoy it or not?
I did.
Let me know.
We need to do some interviews on your family. Because you guys have been around for a long time too.
I have no idea about my family. My dad does not speak up about our
Your
family.
dad does not talk about your
Usually
family.
I have to ask someone else besides my dad.
How information out of him because
I'm gonna try.